The Arizona sun had a way of bleaching things, cloth, timber, bone, but most of all the memories of a happier life. 7 years had passed since Margaret Hawley had buried her husband beneath the lonely cottonwood behind their cabin. 7 years of tending the land alone, speaking to no one but the wind and the wild things that crept near her porch at night. She had come west with hope in her heart, and yet the frontier carved that hope down to something smaller and quieter. Like an ember struggling to stay alive in the ashes. Margaret was no fragile thing, though. She rose before dawn each morning, chopping wood with hands that had long ago lost their softness. She repaired fences, tended the mule, and kept the cabin standing despite storms that howled like spirits. The nearest town was nearly 20 miles away, a dry, dusty ride that she made only when she needed supplies she could not grow or craft herself. Folks in town whispered about her, the widow who won't leave that valley. Some said she was stubborn, others said she was grieving, and a few said she was touched in the head for living alone in Apache country. But Margaret had learned long ago that rumors were as common as cactus thorns. What mattered was keeping herself alive and the cabin upright, and the past in a place where it couldn't hurt quite so much. The day everything changed began like any other. She was in the yard splitting logs, the rhythmic crack of wood echoing through the still morning. The air carried no warning, no rustling brush, no distant hoofbeats. One moment she stood alone beneath the hard blue sky, and the next a shadow fell across her. Margaret froze, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly she turned. 4 warriors stood just beyond the edge of the yard, tall as the pines behind them and broad as the canyon walls. Apache. Their faces were painted, their long black hair tied with rawhide, their eyes dark and unblinking. They stood like carved stone, silent, unmoving, unmistakably watching her. For a heartbeat, Margaret's world shrunk to nothing but fear. She had seen Apache from a distance before, riders crossing the ridgelines like shadows. But never like this. Never so close that she could see the scars on their arms and the dust. Clinging to their moccasins. Her axe slipped from her fingers and thudded onto the dirt. The tallest of them stepped forward. He was enormous, near a full head taller than the others, his arms thick with muscle. A necklace of carved bone hung across his chest. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command. "Pack your things," he said in accented but clear English. "You come with us." The words hit her harder than the Arizona sun. "What?" Margaret whispered. "Why?" "I haven't done anything." The warrior did not blink. "Danger comes. You cannot stay." "What danger?" she asked, forcing her voice not to tremble. "This is my home." Another warrior, a younger man with sharp eyes, took a single step forward. "Not safe," he said. "Pack now?" Margaret looked between them, searching for any sign of mercy or explanation. She found none. They were carved from iron and dust, and she could tell by the way they carried themselves that they would not repeat themselves a third time. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard stories of women taken by Apache. Some were traded. Some were married off. Some were never seen again. Her breath grew tight. She backed toward the cabin door, palms shaking. "If you intend me harm," she said, her voice hitching, "I will not go quietly." The leader's expression flickered, just barely, as though he understood her fear but did not share it. "No harm," he said simply. "We protect you? Protect?" That made even less sense. Why would 4 Apache warriors want to protect a lone settler woman? But Margaret saw the certainty in his eyes, the urgency beneath the calm. Something was wrong, badly wrong, in whatever danger he saw. She could not see from where she stood. Her instincts wrestled with each other. Stay and fight? Run? Trust them? In the end, survival made the choice for her. The frontier had taught her when to stand firm and when to bend. She stepped inside the cabin. Her hands moved quickly, faster than her thoughts. A small bag of clothes. A canteen. The silver locket with her husband's picture. Her rifle and ammunition. A loaf of hard bread wrapped in cloth. Her eyes lingered on the cabin walls, on the table her husband had built, on the quilt she had sewn through winter storms and lonely nights. Her throat tightened. Was she walking away forever? Another voice cut through her thoughts, deep, stern, unyielding. Hurry. Margaret closed her eyes once, then slung the bag over her shoulder. She stepped out onto the porch. The warriors surrounded her in a loose formation, not touching her but leaving no room for escape. One handed her a horse, a strong chestnut mare. Another mounted without a word. The leader met her gaze one last time. "We ride." And with that, Margaret Hale, the widow of the lonely valley, the woman who had not left her home in months, was taken into the wild by 4 towering Apache, whose intentions she could not read, but the land knew. The land had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. Margaret Hale had spent years believing she had already lived through the hardest days of her life, the day her husband died, the night she buried him alone beneath the cottonwood tree, the long seasons of silence that stretched across her land like an endless winter. But as the 4 Apache warriors led her away from the cabin she'd called home for nearly a decade, she realized grief was only one kind of hardship. Another kind was the sharp, breathless uncertainty of being taken into the unknown. They rode fast, faster than any settler's wagon ever dared. Margaret clung to the saddle, the leather worn smooth by countless miles under the sun. The chestnut mare beneath her seemed to know the path even without guidance, weaving effortlessly between rocky outcrops and sagebrush. The Apaches formed a protective circle around her as they moved, one ahead, one behind, one on each flank. It was a formation she recognized from her husband's stories, though seeing it from inside the circle made her pulse quicken. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the sky, the land shifting from golden morning light to the blinding white glare of noon. Sweat trickled down Margaret's back, but she kept silent. She was too wary to ask questions and too proud to beg for answers. Finally, when the heat grew heavy enough to choke the breath from her lungs, the leader raised a fist. All 4 warriors stopped instantly, horses halting in perfect unison. Margaret reined in awkwardly, nearly tipping forward before catching herself. The leader glanced at her bag. "Drink." His voice wasn't unkind, just blunt, practical. A voice shaped by a land where those who wasted words wasted life. Margaret uncorked her canteen and drank deeply. The water was warm, metallic, but refreshing. She wiped her mouth, then forced out the question that had burned in her since she left home. "Where are you taking me?" The youngest warrior, barely more than 20 by her guess, but with sharp, hawk-like eyes, looked at her first. But the leader answered, "To safety." It was the same answer he had given before. It was also no answer at all. Safety from what? She pressed. "You keep saying danger, but I've lived in that cabin 7 years and never had trouble." The leader studied her for a long moment, as though weighing how much truth to give a stranger. At last he pointed behind them to the distant trail they had traveled. "You did not see," he said. "Tracks. Smoke? Signs? Signs of what?" The warrior behind her, the broadest of the 4, with a deep scar across his jaw, finally spoke. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Killers." The word dropped into the silence like a stone. Margaret's heart tightened. "Killers? You mean Apache raiders?" It was the only danger settlers ever whispered about. All 4 warriors turned their heads toward her in swift, perfect disagreement. "Not Apache," the scarred one said darkly. "White men. Bad men." The leader nodded. "They take what they want, land, horses, women. Leave only bodies behind." Margaret swallowed hard. Her mind raced back through the weeks' distant columns of smoke she had dismissed as lightning strikes, faint boot prints near her watering hole she had assumed belonged to passing cowhands. Suddenly, those small irregularities felt like pieces of a puzzle she had never bothered to assemble. But why me? She asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Why would they come after a lone widow with nothing of value? This time the leader stepped closer. His shadow fell across her saddle. They saw you, he said. We saw them watching your land. Margaret's breath left her like a punch. Someone had been watching her, studying her, the whole time she'd been cutting wood, hauling water, sleeping under her cabin roof with the windows cracked for the night breeze. She felt suddenly exposed, as though hands she could not see had been waiting for the right moment to close around her. The leader continued. We came before they did. For the first time since their arrival, Margaret felt something unfamiliar curl beneath her fear gratitude. But it was tangled with suspicion. Why would you help me? She asked quietly. I'm a settler. And you? She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Apache and settlers had a long, bloody history. Both sides carried scars. Instead of taking offense, the leader looked at her with a stillness deeper than the canyons. Not all wars are between our peoples, he said. Some men hunt everyone. Margaret lowered her gaze. She had heard stories of outlaw gangs who preyed on anyone Apache, Mexican, settler, anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. But those were tales told in saloons and campfires, half believed and half dismissed. Who are these men? She asked. The young warrior answered softly. Red Jack's gang. Margaret stiffened. Even she knew that name. Red Jack was a ghost story made real, a ruthless outlaw with no loyalty. No code, a man who led a band of drifters who burned homesteads, stole cattle, and killed without blinking. Rumor had it that he once dragged a settler woman from her home by her hair and left her for dead in the desert. Margaret's fingers tightened around the reins. Are you certain they were coming for me? Yes, the leader said simply. We found their marks. We saw the direction they tracked. And if you hadn't arrived? The leader didn't answer. He didn't need to. They rode on as the day bled into late afternoon, the sky turning the color of burnt copper. The land grew wilder, rockier. Towering red cliffs rose around them, their shadows long and sharp. Margaret sensed they were nearing Apache territory land few settlers dared to cross. The warriors' alertness increased. Their heads turned often, eyes scanning the horizon, nostrils flaring at the faintest scent carried on the wind. Margaret realized they were no longer merely escorting her, they were shielding her. When night finally fell, they made camp in a rocky alcove sheltered from the wind. A small fire crackled, giving off soft orange light. The warriors sat in a square around it, leaving a space beside the leader for her. Margaret hesitated. Sitting among them felt strange, intimate in a way she had not been prepared for. But the leader nodded once, inviting her. Slowly, stiffly she sat. The youngest warrior offered her a strip of dried meat. She accepted, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact startled her, just a moment of warmth, but foreign, unexpected. Silence hung between them for a long while. Then, to her surprise, the leader spoke. Your husband, he said. He is dead? She stared into the fire. Yes, 7 years now. He nodded slowly, not prying, simply acknowledging her truth in the way Apaches often did, with quiet respect. You lived alone a long time, he said. That takes strength. Margaret swallowed the sudden tightness in her throat. I did what I had to. The leader's gaze held hers. His eyes were dark, steady, ancient in their calm. We will get you to safety, he said softly. You will not be alone in this danger. For the first time since they had taken her from her home, Margaret believed him. The night wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant storms. Margaret rested her back against a warm stone, eyes heavy-dyed as sleep pulled her under. She had one last thought. Whatever journey she had begun, whatever story fate had started writing the moment four giant Apaches stepped into her yard, this was only the beginning. The mountains rose before them at dawn, great red sentinels carved by wind and time, their ridges catching the first gold of morning. Margaret had never traveled this far west, never beyond the jagged edges of the valley she once believed was the entire world. But now, as the Apaches guided her through winding canyons and narrow passes, she felt the land itself shifting around her. The air thinned, the wind cooled, and the silence grew deeper, less empty, more watchful. As if the earth were listening, they rode for hours before the path widened and the land opened into a hidden basin cradled by the mountains. Smoke curled from cook fires. Hide tents stood in neat rows. Children ran barefoot through the dust, and women in bright woven skirts tended to baskets, fires, and the laughter of little ones. It was a village alive, vibrant, protected by the natural fortress of the cliffs. Margaret had never seen an Apache settlement up close. Stories she'd overheard in town painted them as brutal, chaotic, dangerous. But what she saw now was order, rhythm, community. Life lived with a purpose. Men greeted the warriors with nods of respect. A few cast curious glances at her, but no one approached or threatened her. It felt safe, though she didn't know why. The leader who had spoken the least but commanded the most dismounted first. He motioned for her to follow. Margaret slid down from her horse, legs trembling from the long ride. The ground beneath her boots felt solid, steady, but her heart thudded against her ribs. "Come," he said. She followed him toward a large wooden structure near the center of the settlement. Two elders sat outside, one gray-haired and sharp-eyed, the other wrapped in blankets sewn with symbols Margaret didn't recognize. The leader stopped before them and bowed his head briefly. "Elder White Mesa," he said in Apache. "We bring the woman from the valley." White Mesa's eyes shifted to her, piercing, but not unkind. He studied her silently for what felt like a long time, reading more in a single glance than any settler judges could read in a trial. Finally, he nodded once and gestured for her to sit. Margaret lowered herself onto the woven mat opposite him. The leader sat beside her, his presence a strange comfort. White Mesa spoke slowly in accented English. "You wonder why you are here?" "Yes," she said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "I deserve to know. You will know." He lifted a small clay bowl from the table beside him, filled with sand marked by tiny stones arranged in careful patterns. He moved his fingers across the sand, shifting the stones as he spoke. "For many seasons," he began, "our lands and your people's lands have been restless. Men with no tribe and no honor move through the desert. Wolves who look for prey, not for battle." Margaret stiffened. She knew where this was going. "Red Jack," she whispered. White Mesa nodded gravely. "Yes, him and his dogs." "He's real," Margaret said under her breath. "I thought maybe he was just a story meant to scare children or travelers." "Some stories are born from truth," the elder said. "And this one still walks the earth." Margaret swallowed. "But why would he come after me?" The elder leaned forward slightly. "Because you lived alone. Because you lived far from town. Because he believes no one would come to your aid." The truth of it pierced her like a blade. She had prided herself on her independence, her solitude, her ability to survive without anyone's help. But now she understood the darker side of that isolation. She had made herself a perfect target. The leader beside her spoke for the first time. "We found their tracks near your land," he said. "They circled, watched, counted how many nights you slept alone." A chill rippled through Margaret. "You mean they were there?" While I was inside the cabin? Yes. How long? Many days. She covered her mouth, horrified. She pictured herself chopping wood, carrying water, mending clothes, completely unaware of the eyes watching her from the tree line. But why would you help me? She asked again, almost pleading. Why risk yourselves? For the first time, the leader looked directly into her eyes, not with the hardness she had seen before, but with something softer, deeper. We help because they kill without choosing sides. They kill our people. They kill yours. Evil like that is enemy to all. White Mesa nodded. The desert warns us when danger grows. We listen. Margaret lowered her gaze. And I was part of that danger. You were part of the threat's path, the elder corrected. Not its cause. Margaret felt her throat tighten. She had lived so long believing the world beyond her land was indifferent to her existence. To learn that strangers' warriors who had every reason to distrust settlers had risked themselves to save her. It appended something inside her chest. One of the village women approached, carrying a bowl of cool water. She knelt and offered it to Margaret with a gentle smile. Startled, Margaret accepted and drank. The gesture was so simple, so human, that tears stung her eyes. White Mesa spoke again. You stay with us for now, until danger passes. Margaret blinked. Stay? How long? As long as needed. I appreciate your kindness, she said, but I can't live here. My home, my husband. White Mesa lifted a hand. Your husband is with the spirits. His memory walks beside you, even here. But a memory cannot protect you from the living. Margaret's voice cracked. I can't lose my home. You will not, the leader said. You will return when it is safe. The elder shifted the stones in the bowl once more. There is more. Margaret's breath caught. More? He looked at her with eyes that seemed to see her entire history, her loneliness, her grief, her stubbornness and strength. What you call home is known to Red Jack, he said. They will go there again. Her stomach dropped. You mean? They'll burn it? Asterisk, if they find it empty, yes. If they find you there alone. He let the meaning hang in the air. Margaret closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Her cabin, the last piece of her old life, might already be marked for destruction. Her husband's grave, the cottonwood tree, everything she had held on to for years, it all hung in the balance. When she opened her eyes again, she realized she wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying out of exhaustion. Years of holding herself together suddenly too heavy to carry. The leader spoke quietly. You are safe here. With us. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, not as a frightening figure who had taken her from her land, but as a man who had risked his life to save hers. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once. A gesture of respect between equals. As the sun began to slide behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the camp, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not grief, not isolation. Belonging. Something told her that this hidden village, these 4 warriors, and the danger that stalked the desert were about to change her life in ways she never imagined. And though she didn't know it yet, this place would one day feel more like home than the lonely valley ever had. Asterisk. Night settled over the Apache village like a soft blanket. The sky above scattered with more stars than Margaret had ever seen. Out in her lonely valley, she had often looked at the stars for company, imagining her husband among them. But here the stars felt closer, as if leaning down to watch the people below. Fires crackled, children whispered stories, drums beat faintly from somewhere near the center of camp. It was a world she had never been part of, and yet she did not feel out of place. Not entirely. After White Mesa dismissed them, the leader, whose name she overheard the others call Tall Hawk, guided her to a small shelter at the edge of the camp. A woven mat, a blanket of tanned hide, and a clay jar of water waited inside. It was more hospitality than she had expected from men who had dragged her from her home. "Rest," Tall Hawk said. "Tomorrow you meet others." Margaret nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. "Thank you for everything." Tall Hawk's expression softened so slightly she wondered if she had imagined it. Then he turned and stepped into the shadows. Margaret curled on the mat, but sleep came slowly. Her mind chased itself, thoughts of Red Jack's gang watching her land, thoughts of Tall Hawk's calm gaze, thoughts of the 4 warriors who had saved her without expecting anything in return. Why me? Why help a stranger? She did not know the answer yet, but she would soon. The camp woke early. Before the sun crested the mountain ridges, men were already practicing with bows, and women were grinding corn while the children fetched water. Margaret stepped outside into the cool morning air, feeling strangely exposed and yet strangely alive. The youngest warrior, the sharp-eyed one called Raven, walked over with a small bowl of warm masa cakes. "Eat," he said, handing it to her with a shy smile. "You need strength." She accepted it, touched by the kindness. He reminded her of the neighbor boy from her childhood back east, quiet, watchful, gentle despite the toughness in his eyes. "Thank you, Raven," she said. His smile widened slightly. "You say my name well." As she ate, Tall Hawk approached, flanked by the other 2 warriors, Stone Bear, the scarred giant, and Running Deer, a wiry scout with quick hands and quicker eyes. Together, they formed a formidable wall of muscle and resolve. "We show you the village," Tall Hawk said. "You learn our ways. Our people learn you mean no harm." So I am the stranger here too, Margaret realized. It was not just she who needed to learn about them, they needed to learn about her dot, and so began the slow weaving of trust. The women taught Margaret how to weave baskets from willow reeds, their hands moving with steady, practiced grace. They laughed softly, teased one another, and treated her as though she were simply another pair of hands joining the work. A girl named Nowlin, a child with bright eyes, took Margaret's hand and led her through the camp, proudly introducing her to each of the elders as if she were showing off a treasured prize. Margaret's heart softened. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be included, to be part of something larger than her own quiet suffering. Running Deer demonstrated how to follow invisible trails, pointing out broken twigs, faint dust patterns, and tiny footprints Margaret would have never noticed alone. "Desert speaks," he said. "You learn to listen." Stone Bear showed her how to grind herbs for healing poultices. Despite his intimidating size, his movements were delicate, careful, respectful of every leaf and root. But it was Tall Hawk who left the deepest impression. He silently observed her from a distance, protective but never overbearing. When he did speak, it was with purpose. "Your hands are strong," he said as she wove reeds. "You do not complain," he noted as she helped grind corn. "You watch before you act." "That is good," he said as she learned to read tracks. Margaret felt something warm unfurl in her chest each time he spoke. Not desire, not yet, but something like trust, respect, safety. It had been so long since she felt anything but loneliness. The feeling almost hurt. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the warriors gathered for training. Margaret stood at the edge of the clearing, arms folded, watching Tall Hawk move with a grace she hadn't expected from such a towering man. He was powerful, yes, but also controlled like a mountain that chose when to shift and when to stand still. Raven approached her quietly. "Tall Hawk watches you," he said softly. Margaret stiffened. "He watches everyone. It's his responsibility." Raven shook his head with a knowing smile. "Not like he watches you." Heat crept up Margaret's neck. "That's nonsense." But when she glanced back, Tall Hawk's gaze found hers steady, unreadable, and yet carrying something she recognized only because she had not seen it in years: interest, not ownership, not threat, not command. Just interest. She looked away quickly, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. That night, the drums stopped, the laughter ceased. A warrior ran into the camp. Breathless, eyes wide, Tall Hawk intercepted him instantly. "Speak." The warrior gasped out a single sentence. "They found tracks. Fresh ones. Near the southern ridge." Silence fell. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Tall Hawk's jaw tightened. "Red Jack?" The warrior nodded gravely. Margaret's stomach dropped. Raven touched her arm gently. "Do not fear. You are safe here." But Margaret knew better now. Red Jack wouldn't stop. He wouldn't abandon his target. And if he had followed the Apache trail, she was not the only one in danger. "I brought this on you," she whispered. Tall Hawk heard her. He shook his head firmly. "No, they would come regardless. They bring war wherever they walk." Stone Bear grunted. "Let them come. We end them." But Tall Hawk was not so quick to invite battle. He looked to Margaret. "You must stay close. You do not wander without one of us." Margaret nodded, though fear fluttered in her stomach. Then White Mesa approached the fire, leaning on his staff. His eyes moved between Tall Hawk and Margaret. "Danger follows the woman," he said simply. "But so does destiny." Tall Hawk's head tilted slightly. "What do you see, Elder?" White Mesa's gaze rested on Margaret, long, deep, knowing. "She has a place among us now," he murmured, "and a bond forming that will change her path." Margaret's breath caught. She felt Tall Hawk's presence beside her like warmth on a cold night. "Bond?" she whispered. White Mesa smiled faintly. "Time reveals all things." Tall Hawk's hand brushed lightly against her lower back, a protective gesture, almost instinctive, and Margaret understood with a slow dawning certainty. Her life had not just been saved by these warriors. It was being rewritten. Asterisk. The storms of the frontier had a habit of clearing the sky right before sunrise, as if the land itself wished to start each day with a clean slate. That morning, the clearing sky stretched pale gold across the horizon, painting the Apache camp in quiet light. Smoke curled upward from small fires. Horses stamped the ground with slow, sleepy rhythm. And Sarah Walker, once the lonely widow of a forgotten cabin, awoke to the soft rustle of buckskin and the low hum of warriors greeting the dawn. She had been with them for weeks now. Weeks that had peeled away the cold weight of isolation from her shoulders. Weeks that had shown her that the Apache who once frightened her were not shadows of danger but men of fierce order, strange kindness, and unspoken honor. Weeks that had turned her heart from fear into something she had long believed. She was incapable of ever feeling again hope, but today was different. Today, she would have to make her final choice. Greyhawk, the oldest of the 4 giant warriors, stood outside her lodge, arms crossed, tall as an oak and steady as the mountains themselves. His voice carried gently through the hide flap. "Widow Sarah, the council waits." Her stomach twisted. She knew this moment would come. The Apache council had spent days arguing. Some wanted her returned to the settlers. Some claimed she was a burden. Others insisted she had proven herself, that she should be welcomed as guest, ally, and perhaps more. But ultimately, her future would rest on her own choice, something she had rarely been given in her whole life. She stepped outside. The morning air was brisk, scented with sage and clay. Greyhawk bowed his head slightly in greeting. "They will ask you 3 questions," he said. "Answer with your heart, not with fear." She smiled faintly. "That seems to be what you've been teaching me since the night you dragged me out of my lonely cabin." He allowed the corner of his mouth to lift his version of a smile. You were not dragged. You walked on your own feet. She chuckled. Only because you were all too large to argue with. He grunted, which she learned was his way of laughing. The council circle was already full when she arrived. Warriors sat in a half moon. Women stood behind them. Children watched from the edges with wide dark eyes. And beside the fire pit sat Swiftbear, the youngest of the 4 giants. The one with the sharp tongue and quick smile who had taken it upon himself to teach her their language. He gave her a nod of encouragement. You ready, White Willow? He whispered, using the Apache name the boys had given her because of her pale hair. No, she murmured back. But I'm here. The council speaker rose, his voice strong as cracked stone. Sarah Walker, widow, settler, lone woman of the West. You were brought to our camp because enemies hunted you. Food was shared. Fire was shared. Protection was shared. Now we ask, do you wish to return to the settlers? Answer truthfully. A wind swept the smoke sideways, wrapping the moment in eerie quiet. Sarah took a breath. I lived among settlers all my life, she said slowly. And in all those years, I was never truly seen. Her eyes lifted across the faces before her. With your people, I have not felt invisible. Soft murmurs rippled through the circle. I have no home to return to, she continued. No husband. No family. No land that welcomes me. So no, I do not wish to return. Greyhawk's eyes softened approvingly. Swiftbear grinned up. The speaker nodded and moved to the second question. Do you wish to remain here as guest untouched, unclaimed, free to leave when you choose, bound by no duty? This question weighed heavy. She had thought of it many nights. She could live peacefully among them, have safety, shelter, kindness, yet still be separate, floating between worlds. I wish to stay, she said, but not as someone who stays on the edge. I have lived on the edge my whole life. I want to belong somewhere. More murmurs. This time deeper, heavier, because the third question was the one that mattered most. The speaker raised his hand for silence. Then hear the final question. Do you choose a place among us by blood oath led by the same warriors who first came to your door? Gasps flickered like sparks. Blood oath was not marriage, but it was close a bond of protection, loyalty, and shared life. It meant she would become part of their people, shielded by the 4 who had taken responsibility for her. It was an honor rarely offered to an outsider. Greyhawk, Redthorn, Stonebear, and Swiftbear stepped forward and knelt on one knee as tradition required. Their great shadows stretched across the earth like protective wings. Greyhawk spoke first. If you choose us, you walk under the shelter of our strength. Stonebear added, voice deep and quiet. If you choose us, your enemies become ours. Redthorn rested a palm against the ground. If you choose us, the land remembers your steps as one of this tribe. And Swiftbear, with that crooked smile he always tried to hide, said softly, if you choose us, White Willow, you will never be alone again. Her vision blurred suddenly, not with fear, but with something warm she had not felt since her husband died. Not even her husband had ever spoken to her with such fierce commitment. The camp fell silent. Sarah stepped forward. The 4 warriors bowed their heads, waiting. She placed a hand over her heart. I choose you, she whispered, voice trembling. Not out of necessity. Not because I was rescued, but because you taught me I still have worth. A sharp cry of approval rose from the women first, then the children, then the warriors. A drumbeat thudded. The fire roared higher as if the wind itself celebrated her choice. Swiftbear rose first, wrapping a ceremonial cloak around her shoulders. You walk with giants now, he teased softly. And I feel taller already, she replied. Greyhawk approached last. He rested a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice was low and reverent. "Your life begins anew, Widow Sarah, under our guard, under our sky, under the law of our people." She looked up at him, then at the other three warriors who had become her protectors, her companions, and now her family. "I'm ready," she said, and for the first time in years, maybe longer, she truly was.